We're in Gold Road, Arizona. Gold Road, Arizona, where I have very many happy memories of growing up as a young child, 4 years and 5 years old with my grandparents. The town of Gold Road used to be right over there, underneath that rocky butte. And my grandparents' house were kind of on the east side, and they had one of the two really nice homes, well, relatively nice homes in town. And the reason that Grandpa had one of those really nice homes was because he was a foreman in the mine, and so he rated something a little better than the average miner. And the rest of the town spread down this way. Aunt Ada, that would be great-grandpa John Kempel's daughter Ada, ran a little restaurant and snack bar right alongside of it, and we used to beg pennies from our mother and come down to Aunt Ada's place and buy little poppers that you'd pull apart, and inside was 2 pieces of toffee candy and a little Cracker Jack-like gift, and they were 2 cents a piece, and we'd come down and visit with Aunt Ada and buy those and eat the candy while we were there. Down just to the west of the town of Gold Road was a town called Mexican Town, and that's not a racist name. That's actually the name that was on the map, Mexican Town, and that's where all the Mexican laborers lived that worked in the mine. The house that my family lived in when they moved here, I was living with my grandparents at the time. I'd been with them for about a year, I guess, living with my grandparents down here in Gold Road. And Mom and Dad and Clifford and Jim moved into town after about a year. And my dad worked in the sheet metal shop, night shift. And the house that we had was very, very basic frame structure that we lived in. It only had about, as I recall, 3 rooms in the house. And my Aunt Ida and Uncle Howard and their 2 boys lived in a house that was wood frame up about this high, and then canvas tent up on top of that. And that was the way they lived. And that was pretty typical of the living situation in Gold Road in those days. I remember one time my dad was working night shift, so my mother would take baby Jim over to Grandma Kempel's house across the highway, and they'd spend the day there so my dad could sleep. And one day Clifford and I were out playing, and a couple of Mexican boys came up from Mexican Town. We're hiking up the old highway up the hill, and Clifford and I got in a rock fight with those 2 boys. And we throwing rocks back and forth. Neither one of us was hitting anything, neither were the Mexican boys, but we were coming close to each other and yelling names at each other, and the Mexican boys were, and we were, and Dad woke up, and he came out, and boy was he mad. He just whaled the tar out of both Clifford and I and let us know that was just totally unacceptable behavior. Another interesting story, when my folks were living here, one of the boys from Mexican Town would come around up into Gold Road proper, peddling tamales, homemade tamales. His mother would make homemade tamales and put them in a lard bucket. And this little boy would come up through Gold Road peddling his mother's tamales. And when he'd come to our house, my dad would buy every tamale he had left in his bucket. And they were so good. The whole family just absolutely loved those homemade tamales. Grandpa and I were sitting out on a big rock out behind his house one evening, watching the lights come down through the switchbacks on the highway. And we watched a truck come down, and he disappeared, and his lights didn't reappear. And Grandpa Grandpa was a heavy tobacco user. Grandpa John Orson Kemple, a heavy tobacco user, really heavy. And he'd been chewing a cut of tobacco, and he got so excited he swallowed his tobacco and promptly threw up in the yard. And then he yelled, "The truck's gone over the edge!" And he ran up to the next house, and he and the gentleman that lived up there ran up the hill, and they found that indeed the truck had gone over the edge of one of those switchbacks, and the truck was a gasoline tanker.
Oh my God.
But it hadn't exploded and hadn't ruptured, but it had gone over the edge. And so all the people in Gold Road and Mexican Town went up and drained the gas out and had free gasoline in their cars for a couple of days before the company came and got that tanker back up out of the ditch where it had rolled. Well, a couple more stories maybe. There used to be an ice cream truck, believe it or not, an ice cream truck back in the 1930s that would drive down from Kingman and stop at all the little mining towns along the way. Any place there was a house, he'd stop and honk his horn. People would run out and buy, for a nickel, they could buy an ice cream bar from him. And somehow, every time he came through, Grandma always seemed to have a dime, and she and I would both go out and get us an ice cream bar from this truck that came down from Kingman. Another story, one time there was an itinerant photographer that came through town, going around knocking on doors wanting to take pictures of everybody, and Grandma decided she wanted a picture of me. And so I was about 4 years old. Grandma wanted me dressed up to have my picture taken, but I didn't have any clothes that suited her fancy. So the photographer had a little suit in his suitcase, and he brought out this suit, put it on me, and it was way too big. But between Grandma and the photographer, they took safety pins and pinned that suit up so it looked halfway decent. Took it all up in back and down the sides, and set me up on Grandma's kitchen table and took some pictures. And I still have one of those pictures. It's hanging on the wall in my bedroom in my home up in Utah now, when I was 4 years old. And if you look carefully, you can see that that suit was too big. But you've got to look carefully to discover that, because it looks pretty good, really. I have some very happy memories of living here with my grandparents before my folks moved into town. It's interesting, when my folks decided they were ready to go back to Good Springs, everybody loaded into the car except me. I'd been living with my grandparents until my folks got there, and then I'd moved in with them. And when they decided to go back to Good Springs, I kind of stepped back with my grandparents and watched everybody get in the car. I had no idea I was supposed to go back with my folks. I thought I lived with my grandparents. I thought they were my family. And so I wasn't going to get in the car with the rest of them. And it took Mom, quite a little while to convince me to get in and go with them. And what finally convinced me was the fact that I was 5 years old almost, and ready to start school, and there was no school in Gold Road. And so what was I going to do about school? And then she promised me I could take piano lessons if I went back to Good Springs with him. So I got in the car and went back to Good Springs, and that was the end of my stay in Gold Road. Okay, this bush is called a catclaw. And the reason it's called a catclaw bush is because it has very, very sharp spines on it. And these spines hurt like crazy when you get into them. So I learned very young as a child to avoid the big catclaw bush that was growing in Grandpa Kemple's backyard. This bush is a Brigham tea bush. Happens to be growing into the catclaw territory. Brigham tea, Mormon tea. Very tasty, makes a really nice non-caffeine tea, caffeine-free tea that keeps you real regular and makes you happy when you drink it.